right, I think we are now good to go. I got another person in the waiting room. All right, Jake, you can take it away.
So, start off with guidance lines. So there are some options of what you can use for guidance lines. 99% of the time, personally, I use either straight AB or last pass. Just personally, that's the way I do things. You do have some other features when you are using guidance lines, like you have the ability to save and reload guidance lines if you want to use them later in different field or in the same field when you come back throughout the year. Just note if you are using WAS that there is that recal button. So if you get back into your old tracks, hit the recal, snap it to where you are. Some of the other options, pivots, multi-line coverage, and last pass switching, and a fixed contour if that's kind of what you're into. I just wanted to quickly touch base on that, just because most of guidance is built on guidance lines and the ability to be able to either bring those back in or make them and use them. So if nobody has any questions about that, we can kind of quickly move on from there.
So one of the features that people may not be aware of, that when you save a guidance line to your machine, Raven will let you reload those guidance lines based on proximity to where you're at. So if you have, 50 or 60 guidance lines or AV lines saved onto your field computer, then what Raven will do is it will show you the closest ones when you go to reload them. So if you forgot to name them correctly as you pull back into the field, it does let you see them and load them, based on how close you are to the guidance line. So it's not like, so if you've saved, two different directions in the same field and you want to go back to that same pass later on, then when you pull back into that field, technically those two AV lines will be the number 1, 2 on the top of your list to reload. All right, move on.
So scouting, it's just kind of something I threw in there. For those of you that don't know or aren't using the scouting features, what it does is it allows you to mark points in that field or job. So you can either drop a flag to mark an obstacle or a problem area. You can create field boundaries, spray zones, no spray zones. Kind of for the purpose of today, I'm going to harp on the field boundaries. It's something I've been pushing for a while now, and it's something that's becoming more and more important as this stuff progresses. So like if you do a field boundary with, and you have your street maps loaded, you can actually load jobs from that boundary, and anything related to that grower farm field in that boundary will show up when you select it. And it allows you to, for later on, if you are going to use, say, the auto turn, it makes those functions better. It also lets you know exactly how many acres are inside that field, which I find is very important on the custom side.
And so with the boundaries, if you want to do auto turn, then you do need to have a boundary of the field. If you forgot to make the field or to make the boundary at the start of the farm and you've already sprayed it, for example, at a previous time, you can auto create a boundary after the fact. So it will use a coverage map to auto create a boundary if you needed to. So this functionality has been, with each software release of the Viper 4, this functionality keeps improving in terms of adding boundaries and working with the data files. So I think over on the right hand side here, what Jake talked about is, here's your boundary map, here's your street map, which is located. And these street maps are created using the Slingshot portal. So when you log into the Slingshot, you can specify the area of map that you want to load. When you click on that boundary image, all your older jobs show up. And you can click on those jobs to either view them or continue on, or you can create a new job. And what it does is it will pre-populate your farm field or client farm field information based on the field that you're in. You can also that is where that functionality comes from.
No.
Okay. If anybody has any questions or anything, they can put your hand up or whatever, and we'll keep an eye on this.
So, when it comes to the steering side, this slide's a little screwed up, but all auto steer systems use a controller. What that controller does is it's the brains of the system. What that does is it takes the messages coming from your GPS receiver and all those GPS and navigation correction signals, and what it does is it changes it over to something with that valve or whatever your steering controller is controlling, whether it's got to go left or right and how much and how hard. So in the Raven world, that was originally accomplished with using what's known as the long box. It's supposed to be shown on the right here. That came out in the 1990s, so close to 30 years ago. Later than that, it was replaced with the SmartRX node, shown on the left. These have been around in some iteration or version for about 15 years. So in the computer world, that's getting pretty old, especially the long boxes and short boxes. Steering technology has greatly improved since then. So why update? Again, because steering technology has greatly improved since then. Options were very limited on what the SmartRX system could do. It did have an integrated built-in gyro in that system, which had some issues when it came to like a front boom machine or changing field conditions. It worked fine for most situations. It had its limitations.
Yeah, and so then Raven introduced the RS1 in 2018, which is hard to believe it's been 4 years already, but again, they keep improving this technology. And it, as Jake just mentioned, like it integrates the GPS and the steering controller and everything all into this box on the roof. And we won't get into a lot of details, but essentially there's two versions of the RS1. There's a high-speed version, which has an SC1 controller inside of it, and that allows for speeds of up to 29 miles an hour. And then there's a low-speed version, which is a TC1, which is designed for tractors and under 12-mile-an-hour operations. So that's for your really high precision entities. And when you see it in a machine, it can look in two different formats. So when you see an RS1 in this shape, it can be either. It can either be it can either do low speed or high speed. It's just a matter of clicking a button in your setup when you're setting it up. Typically, when some of the OEM sprayers come involved, they'll only have the high speed option as an example. And some of the terminology that Raven uses can be a little bit confusing when they start talking about, especially if you're going through the help manuals and the training manuals, they will refer to SC1s and TC1s and RS1, all these types of things. Generally, if you just refer to things as an RS1, that's probably the most simplest way to think about it. That's your steering controller. If you're using an isobus steering valve, then basically all you'll have in your machine is the RS1 and the steering valve, are your two components, as well as a wheel angle sensor mounted on the front axle. On some of the older machines, or the ones that have been converted, on some of those machines, they do not have an isobus steering valve. And so then you would install what's called an HDU. And the HDU looks like this, and it will be mounted in the cab somewhere. And all that is a bridge to let the RS1 talk to the older style steering valve. And so what the HDU does is it sends all of the high current voltage to the steering valve to turn left and right. That is essentially what it does. So anything else to add to that, Jake? Is that pretty decent?
Yeah, so basically, if you are like ordering an RS1, there's lots of options you can do. It does have a scalable GPS receiver built in. So you can go from WAS to RTK or any GS accuracy kind of in between, as well as GLONASS. And then you can order them with that slingshot field hub. So your communication module, like your JD Link or all the other brands, built into that receiver already. Not saying you can't put it in later, but it's kind of depends on the way you order it and how you want it for the future.
Well, what that does is it significantly limits, it reduces the amount of cabling in the cab compared to the older systems. You know, we don't have cables running to a steering controller and to the GPS and to the slingshot modem because it's all integrated. It's just a simple cable. So I think we can skip over this, can't we, Jake?
Yeah, basically over 12 miles an hour, you're going SC1. Under that 12 miles an hour, TC. If you are going RS1, it's just unlocks between the two.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, that HDU is that kind of bridge between your newer high accuracy valves and your older systems. So like if you are doing a retrofit or something like that, you don't have to completely pull everything out and throw a new block in. You can still get that communication between the two.
Yeah, there are some machines where they do recommend a high accuracy or a higher response speed valve like this, but not in every case.
And you will get better performance out of the better valve, but in some cases that's not necessary. You do still have the option of going mechanical with the RS1, SC1 systems. If that's something you want, you can still do it through the SmartRX Md, which is your mechanical drive steering controller, slaps around the steering column. It's really nice for, again, if you don't want to go that hydraulic route, or you want to do something like, say, your planting tractor and your combine. Most of the time, you're not planting corn the same time you're combining it. So it is nice to be able to move that between machines.
In most cases, yeah, we can adapt the older systems. And when I say we, it's the royal we, what I mean, Jake can adapt the older systems. And the majority of the cabling from the steering controller and the valve typically gets replaced. And the SmartRX systems, they talk through Raven's older proprietary CAN bus communication. And the RS1 is an ISO steering controller, so the connections go into a different port on the back of the Viper 4. And so on the older machines, we will need to add in that cable to the back of the Viper 4 to add in the ISO bus signaling. But that being said, as I said earlier, the cabling in the RS1 is typically more contained. And the only other, fairly major modification is there's lots of instances on the older SmartRX systems that did not use a wheel angle sensor. It wasn't required. And RS1 always requires a wheel angle sensor. So you will need to, if you are doing an upgrade, you will need to add one. Either a rotary style of wheel angle sensor like this, or a linear style of wheel angle sensor. So that is something that has to get added. Depends on the brand of the machine and the age of the machine, whether they have it. A lot of machines that are newer, like 2015, 2016 and newer, typically come with a wheel angle sensor already.
Yeah.
All right.
So if you are converting an older system, so things you kind of need to know: year, make, and model of the machine, existing components. Do you have one of those wheel angle sensors? What block do you have? What kind of cabling do you have? Um, Things you must have is like a Viper 4, 4 Plus, or a CRX display. Um, an adequate GPS. What I mean by that is Phoenix 200s and 300s will work, or any other brand of receiver, as long as we get the right communication, will work. It's just for upgrade, if you're going to go that far with the integrated GPS of the RS1, it is quite a bit nicer for cabling. And like a Phoenix 200 can't be fixed anymore. And it drastically changes the way the cabling is done, depending on which route you go. I'm not saying you can't use the receivers that you have. Our machine does, but there's just things to kind of keep in mind. And it just kind of makes everything in the cab neater. Because again, you're eliminating cables, you're eliminating clutter if you're in one of those tighter cabs.
Well, I think, and
And
if
it is,
you, oh, sorry, Jake.
go ahead.
I was going to say, if you want to, if you have an existing beacon, like, so for example, if you wanted to use your Trimble 372 or a John Deere 6000, you can use that. Those would be considered an adequate GPS source, or, and sorry, not, they would be considered an adequate GPS source for the RS1 system to function, because they're high enough quality and they're good accuracy. So the RS1 does not necessarily care. Like, it doesn't have to be Raven proprietary. If you don't want it to be, we do recommend it, but it doesn't have to be.
And then again, it is nice to have that high accuracy ISO steering valve, like your sour valves, just to eliminate, again, eliminating a little more cabling, eliminating the need for that HDU.
Okay. Any questions so far from anybody? Seeing none.
So kind of what do you get if you do go this way? One of the big drawbacks to those older SmartRX systems was kind of that ability to fine tune the machine and make the system work the way you wanted to work and get as much performance out of it as you could. With the RS1 systems, they take kind of what we liked about the older system, expanded on it, and then added a whole bunch of new features with that. This is kind of what you see on the UT widget, because again, it is ISO. So kind of quickly on the side, it gives us the ability to do diagnostics, as well as system information and performance. So we can kind of keep track of that while we're going through. And then something I personally really like, so along the bottom there, is the ability to have more than one quick access preset profile. So you do have that 1 and 2 option. It's not meant for high speed, low speed, or really, really wet fields, really, really dry fields. It's meant for like when you're physically changing something on the machine. So say you're going from those fat sprayer tires in the spring to those skinny row crop tires. When you need to make those bigger adjustments because it's easier to turn them, then you can already have it done quick, ready to go for it.
And then what the diagnostics and status give us is, the offline percentages and steering accuracy. So whether the machine was actually able to stay on the line, which helps for some of the fine tuning.
Yeah. A little more about this front screen. We can just kind of quickly go through it. You got your status up at the top, and then because it's an ISO system and you are running ISO GPS now, you also have that ISO and your GPS icon at the top, so you can get into that there, as well as having those quick access quick adjustment things along the side. The nice thing about it is if you don't know what something does and you just kind of click on the icon, it'll tell you and give you a description of what that setting actually does. So that's something I really like about it. And then if you hit your gears, you can get into even more fine tuning. So again, you have tons of options on what to do for fine tuning. So this is just if you hit those gears, you can get into your steering settings, and then you can get into that advanced tuning or the wheel controls through there. Just like before, but a little bit more expanded on, we still have that wheel control like on your SmartRX systems. You still have your max PWM, you still have your minimum PWM. You can still move your wheels with a soft key, but it also gives you that wheel velocity per second above that. Personally, I really like seeing 100% on your maxes, and then your minimums. I really like to see that 1 degree per second when you hit your mids. It's the best performance I've found out of them. And it's nice because I can actually see what the machine's doing now. I can actually see how hard it's turning. And then again, we have tons of options for things to fine tune. Just like before, if you hit that question mark up at the top, it'll give you a description of what all those settings do. So you don't have to memorize the manuals and read every line. It'll just tell you the information that you need on what that setting does.
And one of the key points here, though, is because we have all these options, it is important to change one thing at a time.
Yeah.
One of the
little increments.
Yeah, in small increments, because you can you do have the option to reset things to default. You can also save your different profiles when you are playing around in here.
Again, lots of settings. Max G-force, something we didn't really have before. It's very much a comfort setting. It's how hard that machine's going to turn.
Right.
It's nice to be able to kind of control that. And again, lots of settings.
Yep. Where this all leads in terms of the settings, and one of the challenges with setting up an auto steer system is trying to figure out how much the steering is controlled by the controller and how much is it limited by the machine itself, because the machines are just hydraulic controllers, and so there's only so much you can do. So one of the features that Raven unlocked a year ago was Autoturn on the headland. And what this allows you to do, assuming you have a headland entered, you must have a headland entered, is it will turn the machine around for you on the headlands. And so we use this on our machines. And one of the things you can do on your own machine, if you have an RS1 and a Viper 4, if you want to try it out, you can put a temporary unlock into your Viper 4, and that'll allow you a certain number of hours where you can test out the auto turn. And the way that you set it up on your machine is you can add the widget, the auto turn widget down here, which allows you to turn it off and on. And what the auto turn widget does is it will tell you the distance to the end of the row, like how many feet it's going to go. And then you tell it which way, the very first time you will tell it which way do I want the machine to turn. And so if you tell it I want it to go to the right, then it will go to the right. Or if you tell it I want it to go to the left, it will turn to the left. And then it will alternate from that point on. It will remember, and it will switch at each headland, turning right and left automatically for you. What's neat from a auto steer setup perspective, especially for the turn in, because that's probably one of the biggest complaints that we have is, how do I get this machine to turn in smoothly and be on target? By using the auto turn functionality, you can really see the impact. You can really see the impact of the G-force setting as well as your heading gains and your yaws, and as well as these mins and maxes. So it's an incredible tool for setting up your auto steer settings, because you can set these settings and then you can actually go through and let the machine steer itself around the curve and try to bring itself in online. And so again, these are different. If you have a front boom machine or a rear boom machine, you want it to behave differently. What the machine does on the curve, and you'll see it in the next video, hopefully if it's not too choppy, is it will show the intended line that the machine is supposed to be on. And by adjusting your settings, you're able to watch the machine drive either online or offline as the time goes through. It was a really, it was a fun, fun experiment, and I'll get to the next thing on here. You do need a boundary. And so when you're setting up the Autoturn, you will tell it how many paths or how many swaths of headland did you create. So did you do one path or two? You can also tell it when it's turning, do I want to do every other path? So if your machine, for example, is incapable of turning back into the next AV line and you do skip swaths, it has that capability. So if you have a smaller machine, it has an additional boundary buffer feature. And what this is for is it will tells it how far you want the boom to stay away from the outer boundary. So if you don't set a buffer, it will bring the boom tip to the boundary edge. But if you're worried about trees and branches and fence posts and all that kind of stuff, you can keep some distance with your buffer, with your boundary buffer, to keep it away so the boom isn't swinging out through the boundary. And then the turn speed, what the turn speed is this is an indicator to the operator as to how fast should I be turning at. And so the way the auto turn works is when you get up to the edge of the field, it will give you a notification that it's going to turn, and you'll pull back on your stick to your desired turning speed. And then it just takes over and turns, that there's no input from the operator. And when we were using it in our machines, for the most part, other than hitting your engage and disengage switches, you're never touching the foot switch again or the engage switch again as you're going in the field. It's quite a neat feature. So you can see on the map how this is your headland, here is your swath, and here's what the turn is going to look like on the machine. This is what the theoretical turn should look like, and can your machine actually make it? And there is a question in the chat. It says, does it matter whether your headland is past 1 or past 2? And that's a great question, Adrian, and I actually don't know the answer. So that, I think Jake's shaking his head. You know the answer.
No, it doesn't matter, because you're telling it how many headlands you're doing. So we can actually drive in either one of those headlands, depending on which one you tell it you want it to ride in. That's right. That top headland swaths.
Perfect. Okay, good.
So you can do up to 4 headlands if you want, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
And then that picture will always show up, and it'll show you how it wants to make that turn. And you can confirm it or deny it. Or if the machine physically can't, it'll tell you, okay, we've got to skip a swath.
So I have a video, and I don't know if I have a video. This is what it looks like in the actual machine. It's probably going to play a little bit choppy, but I think it should give us an idea. And so what you can see on the screen is I'm riding in my 4920, and I'm coming up to the headland, and you can see how it is drawn on the Viper 4, what that screen is going to look like, what the turn is going to look like. And there's my speed. So I'm in the blue. So it is now going to turn me around. And what we do with your settings is you have it so that it follows as closely to this line as I possibly can. Okay, so in my case, I've got a spinner spreader on the back of this machine. And so I don't need to be super precise on the turns, just because the way that it was working, but I was pretty happy with that. You know, if you have a front boom machine and you need to swing past the line, then you're able to do that, and that's how you can help to, you know, to really fine tune that steering. I know that other, you know, other companies have talked about, you know, they have some of this functionality, like it's a really nice feature to use. And then you also will set your G-force settings so that when the machine is turning, that also sets how gentle you are on your boom. Like, so when you're turning, how hard is it on that 120-foot boom or whatever you've got, when the machine is steering for you. Any
Yeah.
questions on the Autoturn or on the RS1 settings? So anybody, if anybody out there is running an RS1, if they have some questions, you know, feel free to ask them. You know, you can interrupt us, it's okay. You want to pivot here now, Jake?
Yeah. So now we can kind of pivot towards the VSN. So the vision steering systems. It's kind of the latest technology. It's been out for a little bit now from Raven. It is meant for a merged crop to drive up and down that row. And it utilizes a non-contact vision camera to navigate that crop row. It allows the operator to focus more on effective application control, minimize crop damage, cover more acres in a day, and essentially provide an easier machine to operate for that operator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Jake and I saw the very first version of the vision camera back when we went to Sioux Falls to the Raven Technology Day. We were very excited about it then, and that was, you know, BC before COVID, when we were allowed to travel. And last year we talked about it a bit at our session, but we actually ran 2 of these vision cameras in 2021. We ran them ourselves, and I don't know, it's hard to not do a sales pitch on them. I think we put it on our machine, and we were very, very pleased with the results. And we're going to go through some slides and just kind of talk about how it worked. So the vision camera that we installed on the Rogator had the stereo camera. So what makes this a little bit different from like a Reichhardt or the John Deere system that John Deere originally came out, but again, against the Reichhardts, is that it does not use any contact. There's no feelers of any kind that are touching the crop. Now for high canopy, they do have radar sensors that are located on the axles. So they use the combination of the vision camera and the little radars on the wheels. There is a small video here from Raven. I'm not sure how well this is going to play. Yeah.
So, big part about it, helps with fatigue of the operator at the end of the day. Personally, doing 700 acres a day, not tired. Big part of it. Minimizes crop damage and row crop applications. And then even when you tie that in with that Autoturn, it's even more, even less crop damage and even more control of that machine. It does help with that pass to pass and avoid moving, skip rows and odd spacing. And then works in full canopy. So that full canopy system, with the camera, you go up to about 90% coverage of that row. And then with the radar sensor, you can go up to that 100% coverage by putting those radars on those the inner wheel motors on the front steer wheels. And it's just, I'm sold. When it comes to the actual operation of it, you have 3 different modes you can run in. So you have your GPS, your Vision, and your Vision Plus. So you have your GPS mode, which allows you to run just like before, where you have your strictly GPS guidance, vision, which is just using either your cameras or your radars for going up and down the row, or that vision plus, which is a combination of both. So say you get into a spot that's a little weedy, or you don't have the best vision of that camera or those radars, it can always default back to GPS until you get through that spot, just to make sure that everything kind of stays straight and square while you're going through it.
And I think one of the things that we were hoping to talk over that Raven video when it was playing, but when you have the system engaged and you turn it on to vision or vision plus, you don't actually have to calibrate it to tell it to drive down the roads. Like when you drive into the cornfield, like it just starts working immediately. Like you just basically you let go of the beeps, you let go of the wheel, and it's working. What the Vision Plus does, it works pretty good in soybeans, and especially last year we had a lot of drowned out spots in our soybeans. And so what the Vision Plus allowed it to do is it would use the stereo camera to see the soybean rows. And then when you're driving through the drowned out spot, which had no plants, then the GPS takes over. And then once it sees the soybean rows again on the other side of the drowned out spot, well, then the vision camera takes over. So it makes it a very automatic process. And when you're turning on the headlands, obviously it's using GPS on the headlands to navigate around on those turns, and then the camera takes over.
So as of right now, works in corn and beans, sunflowers, cotton, and sorghum. Can go up to 20 miles an hour on a rear boom sprayer in 30-inch rows, and up to 15 miles an hour on a front boom sprayer in 20-inch rows. It does need like a minimum crop height of 4 inches. And can go up to 30% weed coverage, because again, it needs to, when it's not using the radars, it does need to see the difference between the ground and the crop to know whether that row is.
Now, if you are working in wheat or solid seeded beans and you have made a previous track with your sprayer tires, then it will follow the old track that you had made the last time.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can go up to 15-mile-an-hour crosswinds. Why you would want to be spraying in 15-mile-an-hour winds is not my problem. Just don't do it near me. And again, it'll work in both straight and those contoured rows. So you don't have to turn it off to do your headlands. You can use it to spray those headlands. Kind of quickly here, this is what that camera is actually seeing. So because it takes up a camera spot on the Viper 4, I can actually see it through the diagnostic side, and I can see what that camera sees. So up at the top, you have that solution quality. That's how well it sees the row. You have the orange lines, which are your kind of like a tram line. And the green would be the crop in the row, and the white there, that is where it wants to be driving. That's your actual guidance line. Again, this isn't something you need to watch while you're running it. It's just nice to have for diagnostics.
And just to be clear, the VSN system does use one of the camera ports on the Viper 4. So it does take one of your cameras away. I don't know that I ever looked at this other than in the diagnostic side, but you can fine tune the machine. So sometimes, depending on how the radars would read or whatever, sometimes the machine might want to, kind of lean to one side. And so then you can offset it. And I think Jake will talk about that in the next screen, but it does give you that choice on how to deal with your settings.
Yeah. So again, because it's an ISO based system, we have another one of those ISO UTs. Kind of going quickly across the top, you have your status of what that system is doing, green, red, yellow. And then the actual live quality is shown there. Beside that, that's where you select whether or not the row sense source. So whether it's the camera or the radars. Below that, we have the machine roll because it does need to know whether or not you're on a side hill, doesn't need to compensate for that. On the other side, you have your machine speed. And it's always nice to know how fast you're going. And then this is what Chuck was talking about, those camera furrow offsets. Say you had odd spacing or you're in a guest row or something like that, you want it to run straight down that track, you can actually adjust it by an inch, by 0.3 of an inch, left and right, just to kind of make sure you're always going to be in that spot where you want it to be riding. Below that, you have that solution quality. So that's that threshold of where it's going to drop back to, say, your Vision Plus or your Vision Plus, where it's going to drop back to relying on the camera or relying on the GPS. And you kind of set that there for what you're comfortable with and where you want that to run. Below that, you have your row spacing for, because you have to calibrate for what row spacing you have. Kind of keep moving on here. When you're running with the radar in your full canopy, very similar, a little less because we don't have that that camera to relying on. We're actually seeing the crop with the radar sensors on those wheel motors.
So this is what it looked like when you're doing a mounting. So this is where it's mounted on a rear boom machine. It is mounted over top of the right front tire, and the bracket that comes with it sets the angle based on the height. On front boom machines, where are they mounted on those, Jake?
They're mounted on the front boom.
So they're mounted on the front, on the boom itself.
Yeah, when you're adding it to one of those front boom machines, you also have to add an additional radar sensor, because then it actually tells it how high off the ground it's going to be to make sure it's always got that right spot where the camera needs to be.
That's correct.
And then it kind of does the math for, I'm 6 feet above the ground. This is where I need to be. This is what I'm looking for.
Yep. And then we'll see if this video will play. So this is actually me riding in the machine. So what we found running the vision camera is we were able to drive, I would say, at least a mile or two per hour faster. Now, keeping in mind that we do a lot of custom application of in-tall corn. And so we don't really know what we're being thrown when we go into that. You know, we could have people with 6-row planters and 12 rows and 16s, and you could have chisel plowed ground and uneven rolling ground. And so because of the vision camera, what it allowed us to do is, again, it allowed us to go a little bit faster. Now, we don't typically drive through corn much faster than 12 miles an hour anyways, but I think we averaged a lot closer to 12 than we ever did before in all field conditions. So we were able to drive faster kind of most of the time. And that probably gave us another, I'm going to say, at least 100 acres a day by picking up that 1 or 2 miles an hour. The other one too is that, as Jake mentioned earlier, you're not tired at the end of the day. One of the challenges with an auto steer system in a sprayer, especially in a big corn area like us, is you tend to not use the auto steer a lot when you're spraying corn, unless someone has RTK and then you can use it. But now you can use the auto steer a lot of the time. And so we found it was quite the efficiency gain. And then on my 4920, I use it when I was spreading urea into the standing corn. So we were using the vision camera to steer the 4920 and keep it off of the corn rows. This row gator has the hydraulic lift on it, and just by the design of how that hydraulic lift is, the wheels are a little bit wide and they're quite tight to the rows. And we received significantly fewer complaints in 2021 versus 2020. Not that we got a lot of complaints, but we we actually had people commenting on how good of a job this machine did at keeping that sprayer off of the corn. It does compensate on side hills as well. So because it's using a combination of the tilt sensor and the radar sensors, when you go on a hill and that sprayer is pushing off to one side, it will steer it back, and it does a lot better job than in the past of keeping that machine on the rows. You want to add anything to that, Jake? Or?
No, my biggest thing was at the end of the day, because you're not doing nearly as much steering, and the 10, 20 different planners you're following in a day. It's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm trying to not make it a sales pitch, but
yeah,
it's hard. It's quite nice. It does have a few requirements. So you do need to have a Viper 4. It is going to use up one of those 4 camera slots in it. You are going to need RS1, SC1. It's really nice to have Slingshot with it, just for that diagnostics and updates and all those fun things for that. You do need a little bit of standing crop to calibrate. Once you've done it, and I don't mean calibrate the steering, I mean calibrate the row spacing. So
yeah, where the machine is going to run down the row.
Yeah. So like say your 30-inch, your 38, your 20-inch rows. The nice part is you have 5 different spacings that you can have already done. So once you've done a 30-inch row, you don't have to do it again.
Yep. One of the questions
really
that was
nice.
asked in the chat was, how does it handle corn on a windy day? And because it has the radar sensors on the bottom, so when I'm assuming they say tall corn was in the question. So because it's using the radar sensors down close to the bottom of the plant, the wind doesn't actually affect it very much at all. So if you are comfortable with, if you're comfortable spraying in that wind, the VSN does not care.
No.
It actually enabled us to spray in some conditions where we normally wouldn't. I know with our other machine that doesn't have it, sometimes you couldn't tell where the rows were. And with when you combine a VSN with a Hawkeye system, for example, that you have individual nozzle control, now you don't even really care what set of rows you drive into, because you don't need to even be able to see them. And we'll get to Brandon's question here in a second.
Again, it will need those radar sensors if you are going to the full canopy. Got a hard time doing it without them, just to have that ability to do the full canopy. And then at the end of the day, you are going to need a desire to be less tired at the end of the day and do less crop damage. You're going to want to do a good job, because if you don't care, you don't care. Yeah. As of right now, there are kits available for AGCOs, Case New Hollands, Apaches, and RBR machines for camera only. When it comes to the full canopy side, there's kits available for those AGCOs, Case New Hollands, and the newer Millers. So,
all right, we have another question, Jake. I think what we'll do is we'll go through this next question, and then we can kind of open up the floor. One of them is I have a question on Autoturn. If I'm using an old boundary and my current coverage map doesn't go all the way to the edge of the boundary due to the trees growing, will the Autoturn keep me in my headland tracks, or will it stay at a preset distance from the old boundary? And I think, Brendan, it will keep a preset distance from your old boundary. So that is something to be aware of. And so if you are concerned at all, this is what that machine offset is for.
no.
But that is a concern. And I know that we ran into this running the autonomous robots. The boundary maps, precision on boundary maps is important. And so we're using this technology of Autoturn and these types of things is one step away from an autonomous machine. And so having accuracy on the boundary map is very, very important.
Yeah. So just like everything from Raven, they have a very good support system. So if you go to portal.ravenprecision.com, you can get access to all the owner's manuals, because I know everybody loves reading them and they read every word of it. And you can find authorized Raven dealers such as ourselves, all your manuals. You can find YouTube videos and tutorials on how to calibrate, fine tune. I'm not saying you can't find those on YouTube already. It's just easier and everything's kind of organized and sorted from here, as well as information on other Raven products and systems.
All right, so that's all of our slides, and that's taken up pretty much the hour, so we timed that pretty good. And I'm just going to stop my screen share. And yes, does anybody else have any other questions? And if you don't, that's okay too. You can always reach us afterwards. Oh, it says here, question, I didn't see Higgy on the list of sprayer kits. Can vision be used on a Higgy? So I think I'll take that as this will be a political answer. So officially, Raven does not make a kit for a Higgy machine. However, you can retrofit a vision camera onto a Higgy if you want to. So we have done retrofit kits in the past, and the trickiest part is mounting the radars on the wheels. That's the tricky part. The actual mounting of the camera and the cabling is pretty straightforward. It's mounting of the radars on the wheels that has to be custom fabricated. But otherwise, there's no reason why the vision camera won't work on the Higgy machine. And I think there's some political stuff between John Deere and Raven right now. That is one of the reasons why that kit is not there. And I don't know any more than that, so I won't say any more than that. Any other questions? If not, I'm going to end the screen recording.